So welcome back to a brand new series on meditation for beginners. Last series we've already looked at some of the skills involved with meditation and how meditation can be fitted into our everyday life. This mini-series we're going to be looking a little more in depth at the lifestyle considerations that apply to meditation and how we can build our lifestyle into one where we can enhance our own well-being. If you'd like to call this mini-series by a name, perhaps you can call it Meditation and Self-Development. Before going any further with the course, I'd like to point out some of the attitudes which you may find useful when you are thinking about your own self-development. Namely, first of all, you have to have a clear idea where you're going with your self-development. By this we mean setting our goals, and this will help us to set our priorities, especially how we're going to divide up our time for the self-development process. Secondly, you need to have an open mind, because many of the things which you're going to meet on the course and in the course of your own self-development will be things which are coming from ancient times. Maybe you don't find them so relevant to your daily life. Thirdly, you have to absorb what you can absorb immediately. Some of the things which you may hear on the course may not seem immediately relevant to you, but you should take advantage of the things which you can absorb immediately, and maybe later on some of the benefits of the other things you've learned about but not understood completely will sink in later. Another thing which you have to be reminded of is that results don't happen immediately with either self-development or meditation. It's rather a process of delayed gratification. So sometimes we have to be prepared to sweat it out. I once had a conversation with someone involved with the forest industry. If you plant a tree, it takes at least 20 years before you get any profits back from your investment. And at that time I learned that it's very hard to find people to invest in this industry at all, because most people simply don't have the patience to wait it out. But as self-developers, certainly we need to have the patience of a forest industry investor for sure, because sometimes it's going to be many years before we start to see real concrete effects from our self-development. Another thing which we should be reminded of is that we need to spend a little time each day on our self-development process, or especially our meditation. Another thing which I'd like to advise is that you should leave aside anything in the process which makes claims to superiority over other traditions or over other methods of self-development. Sometimes if you start thinking to yourself that this is the only way to practice, or this is the only place where you can find wisdom in the world, then perhaps you should be re-examining your own outlook on the world. Because I'd never like you to come to the point in your studies where you start to dismiss any other sources of knowledge which may come from other traditions. And last but not least, you should create your own personalized approach to your tradition and to your own self-development. If it's not your own practice, then no one else can do it for you. So you should really find a way to internalize the knowledge which we're talking about on this course. The first most important thing about self-development is what we're actually dealing with. And the thing which is unique about self-development is the sort of knowledge which we're talking about, which is knowledge which is not quite the same as the sort of knowledge which we've spent 12 years studying at school, 4 years studying at university. Because most of the knowledge which we learn about in the world, which we see from the textbooks, which we hear about from our professors and lecturers, really this is just knowledge which is useful for earning our living better or going further in our vocation. But the sort of knowledge which we're talking about in self-development, the insight knowledge or the deeper transcendental knowledge, this is something completely different. Same name, but different content. And perhaps it's useful to point out that there are 3 different levels of knowledge in the world. The first sort of knowledge which we can talk about is knowledge which is theoretical. This is the sort of knowledge which we hear about, or maybe we learn as theories without ever having applied it. It's like a child who you tell that fire is hot and that they shouldn't touch it, but they don't really understand the meaning of danger or the meaning of hot until they have had a chance to put their hands in the flame, and then you don't need to do much explaining anymore. This first sort of knowledge is like the theoretical knowledge which we've never tested out for ourselves. It's the sort of knowledge which we use to take examinations, but it's really rather superficial knowledge. A second sort of knowledge which we're talking about is applied knowledge or hands-on knowledge. This is a sort of knowledge which we're talking about a few moments ago with the child who puts their hand in the flame of a fire. Because they have the experience now of what hot really means, then they have a much clearer idea of the real nature of that material. It can be compared to a person who has been educated to the point that they have actually applied their knowledge and they start to learn about the nature of the world on an educated level. For example, if there was a fisherman standing on the edge of a lake and he saw a certain sort of waves on the water, he could take an educated guess that there would be certain sorts of fish living in that water, or perhaps prawns or shrimps or shellfish in the water which are causing those ripples. But again, it's only an educated guess. He doesn't actually know what is causing the ripples under the water, but he depends on his own experience and his own knowledge which he has accumulated over the course of many years. This is only a second sort of knowledge, but all the knowledge in the books and all the knowledge which professors can teach you in the world go no further than these first two sorts of knowledge, that is, the theoretical knowledge and the hands-on knowledge. But the sort of knowledge which we are talking about in self-development goes much deeper. It's knowledge which we talk about in terms of insight into deeper truths. It's knowledge which doesn't come from thinking, but it comes from the still mind. And if you go back to the example a few moments ago of the man standing on the shore and looking at the ripples on the water, it would be equivalent to the man being able to see clearly to the bottom of the water with his own eyes, to the point that he knew exactly what was causing the ripples without any shadow of a doubt. This is what we mean by insight knowledge, because it's not knowledge which comes from thinking about the nature of the world. It comes from the still mind itself. Often when we talk about knowledge, you hear phrases such as throwing light on a matter or being in darkness about a matter. When we are talking about insight knowledge, and this is exactly what you're interested in, it means boosting the brightness of the mind to the point that we can actually see the nature of the world, especially inside our own minds. But the sort of brightness we're talking about is not like the brightness of a firefly or the brightness of lightning over the horizon, but it's the brightness of 100 suns or 1,000 suns compressed down, condensed down into a single point. This is a sort of brightness which we can bring about in the mind if we are successful in our self-development. And the sort of knowledge which such brightness allows us to have access to, this is the sort of transcendental knowledge which we are really interested in from the point of our self-development. So what's the point of self-development anyway? Sometimes in Asia, if you ask a person why they meditate, they say, well, I just do it in order to be happy. But from the Western point of view, sometimes this seems a little bit of a glib reason for meditating. To put in so much effort and so many hours into the work of self-development simply to be happy, well, sometimes we rather devalue the concept of happiness at all. But perhaps to give some scenarios where we can see the use of studying this third and deeper sort of knowledge, maybe it will be more immediate if I give some examples. The sort of challenges which people meet in their everyday lives which they find that they're not prepared to live up to or they're not ready for are things like when our children are growing up, and perhaps they're growing up to become stubborn or selfish, and we simply don't know what to do about it in order that our children can grow up into better people. Sometimes we are put in situations where we lose our temper and we are unable to change this bad habit. Sometimes we are confronted by suffering in life, especially the sort of suffering of things like bereavement, or maybe even the more subtle things like the culture shocks of traveling around the world and coming across new cultures. Sometimes if we're in a management vocation, sometimes we find that we don't have the patience or the skills to be able to make a good job of managing our subordinates in our workplace. And sometimes, if we're in a friendship or in a marriage, we find that we don't have the personal qualities to keep that friendship or marriage going. These are the sort of challenges which we come up in everyday life, which are showing the lack of the sort of knowledge which we're talking about, the sort of inside knowledge which leads us to have a better understanding of the true nature of life. But to get such a sort of knowledge is something which is not easy, is not evident for us in our modern society. Our modern society is rather a throwaway society, and people in general tend to have rather a short attention span. Sometimes we are spoon-fed with simplifications in the media which don't allow us to grasp the deeper meanings of the nature of life. So when we are facing up to the challenges of the self-cultivator or the person interested in self-development, really we find that we are up against many new things in life, maybe challenges which we have never met before in the course of our education or even our working lives. But what I'd like to leave you with today are 3 major challenges which we face as self-developers, and it's these 3 challenges which we're going to be looking at the solutions to over the course of the next 10 weeks. The first thing which is important for you to do as a self-developer is to develop the requisite vision which you need in order to be a good self-developer. What sort of vision do we need? Well, first of all, it's the vision to be able to recognize the weaknesses, the room for improvement in ourselves, to be able to accept the criticism of others. Sometimes we think that our outlook on the world is not important, but outlook changes a lot of things. If you are able to see the room for improvement in yourself, then that is the most important first step on the path to actually improving yourself. The second challenge which we need to meet up to is integration and commitment to practice. This second challenge for the self-developer is very important if we are going to integrate our meditation practice or our practice for self-development into our everyday lives. Sometimes commitment is not enough, and we need to integrate and make sure that even the most mundane aspects of our everyday life are integrated with our practice for self-development. Only in this way can we really start to make progress in our self-development at all. Last but not least, then we have to face up to the challenge of making effective channels of communication. We might think that self-development is a very personal and a lonely path which we have to follow. But in fact this is not the case. Unless we can reach out to those around us with our practice, then in the end we may find that we are limited in the progress which we are able to make. Personally speaking, I can remember when I started meditation, I didn't dare to tell my parents or my relatives that I was meditating for the first 18 months of my meditation practice, simply because I didn't know enough about meditation to be able to explain to them. But later on, they were more able to accept meditation because I was able to give a more clear explanation of what I was actually doing. This is one small example of how we can make effective channels of communication as a result of our self-development. It's very important if we are wishing to reach out to society and to make the world a better place as a result of our meditation and self-development. So, we find that although we haven't talked about spirituality so far today, we've talked only about self-development, but these are values which are leading us to a privileged position in society where we have something very precious to offer back to society in terms of values and in terms of leadership. So don't think that the path which you're walking is a lonely path. It's a path where you are not only benefiting yourself, but you're also benefiting society around you as well. So, over the coming week, take a look at yourself to see how you are facing up to some of the 3 challenges of the self-developer. Certainly, facing up to the challenges is not the work of a single day. On this course, it will take us 10 weeks even to describe the possible ways to face up to these 3 challenges. So next week we have an appointment together to take another session in this mini-series to look at what to change in our lives and what to put up with. More important still, we'll be looking at how to tell the difference between the 2. So in the meantime, keep up your daily meditation, and I'll see you again next week.